The town of Millfield had always been a quiet place, nestled in the heart of the woods and bordered by the winding Mill River. But beneath the tranquil surface of the water, something sinister lurked. People had always been drawn to the river. They would come to swim, fish, or simply sit and watch the water flow by. But there were whispers in the town, rumors of a presence in the river that beckoned people to it and drove them mad. The first victim was a young boy, just 12 years old. He had been playing by the river one afternoon when his parents heard him screaming. When they arrived, they found him standing waist-deep in the water, eyes glazed over and a look of terror on his face. He didn't respond to their calls, and when they tried to pull him out of the water, he lashed out at them, screaming incoherently. It was only after they managed to drag him to safety that they realized something was terribly wrong. The boy had changed. He was no longer the cheerful, curious child they had known. Instead, he was sullen, withdrawn, and prone to violent outbursts. Over the next few months, more people fell victim to the river's call. Some drowned, others took their own lives, and a few even turned on their loved ones. The townspeople were terrified, and no one dared to venture near the water anymore. But there was one man who refused to be scared off. His name was Tom, and he had lived in Millfield his whole life. He was convinced that there was something in the river, something he could feel, but not quite see. He spent his days walking along the riverbank, searching for answers. And one day, he found them. He was standing by the water, lost in thought, when he heard a voice in his head. It was soft and seductive, beckoning him to come closer. He felt his feet moving of their own accord, drawing him inexorably towards the water. He knew then that he was lost. But he didn't care. He wanted to see what was calling him, to understand the river's secrets. And so he waded into the water, deeper and deeper, until it was up to his chest. That was the last anyone saw of Tom. Some say he drowned, others that he was driven mad and took his own life. But there are those who believe that he found what he was looking for, that he discovered the entity that lived in the river and became one with it. And now, whenever the townspeople walk by the river, they can feel its call. They can hear the whisper in their minds, the seductive promise of secrets and knowledge. And they wonder if they too will be drawn into the water, never to return. As the months went by, the people of Millfield began to notice more strange occurrences along the river's edge. They would see figures moving in the water, just beneath the surface, their forms shimmering and indistinct. Some said they could hear voices in their minds, whispering secrets and promising power beyond imagination. But the river wasn't content to merely whisper. It began to actively lure people to it, calling out to them in voices that were at once soothing and terrifying. Some were able to resist its pull, but others were not so lucky. They would stand transfixed at the water's edge, their eyes fixed on the shifting shadows below. And then they would step into the water, their bodies disappearing beneath the surface with a barely audible splash. They would sink down into the river, their screams silenced by the water's embrace. As the deaths mounted, the town's leaders began to worry. They knew that they couldn't let the river continue to claim lives, but they didn't know how to stop it. They hired experts in the occult and paranormal, hoping to find a solution, but nothing seemed to work. And then one day, a stranger arrived in Millfield. He was a man of few words, dressed in a black suit and carrying a battered leather case. He claimed to be a detective, specializing in cases of the supernatural. The townspeople were skeptical at first, but they were desperate. They told the stranger about the river, and he listened intently, his face impassive. And then he made them an offer. "I will solve this problem for you," he said. "But you must agree to my terms." The town's leaders were hesitant, but they had no other choice. They agreed to the stranger's terms, and he set to work. For weeks, the stranger prowled the river's edge, his eyes scanning the water for any sign of the entity that lurked within. And then one day, he found it. He waded into the water, his hands reaching out to touch the shimmering form that writhed just beneath the surface. And then he began to speak, his voice low and insistent. The townspeople watched in amazement as the river's surface began to ripple and churn. They saw the stranger's form disappear beneath the water, his arms still moving in slow, deliberate motions. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the water calmed. The stranger emerged from the river, his clothes soaked and his face alight with triumph. "I have banished the entity," he said. "It will no longer trouble you." The townspeople cheered, lifting the stranger up on their shoulders and carrying him back to the town. But even as they celebrated, they wondered what had become of the entity that had haunted their river for so long. And they wondered if it would return, or if the stranger's magic had truly banished it for good. As the weeks went by, the people of Millfield began to notice a strange change in the river. The water that once flowed so calmly and peacefully now roared and churned, its surface breaking with sudden and violent waves. And then the people began to disappear again. They would wander off into the woods or the fields, their eyes glassy and unseeing. Some would return days or weeks later, their bodies marked with strange, twisting scars. Others were never seen again. The stranger who had come to Millfield claimed to have banished the entity from the river, but some whispered that he had only made things worse. They said that he had been a con man, a charlatan who had taken advantage of their desperation and their fear. Then one day, the stranger himself disappeared. Some said that he had gone back to the river, hoping to find some way to profit from the chaos he had caused. Others said that the river had claimed him, just as it had claimed so many others. But it didn't matter. The people of Millfield knew that they were in trouble, and they knew that they had to do something to stop the river from claiming any more lives. They gathered together, a group of brave men and women determined to find the source of the river's madness. They ventured deep into the woods, following the river's twisting path until they came to a clearing. And there, in the center of the clearing, they found a strange altar. It was made of stones, each one marked with symbols and glyphs that no one could understand. And on the altar sat a small, pulsing stone. One of the men reached out to touch the stone, and as his fingers brushed against it, he felt a sudden jolt of electricity. He stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock and horror. And then they saw it. A figure, hovering just above the altar, its form indistinct and shimmering. They could hear it, too, a low, insistent voice that whispered secrets and promises of power beyond all imagination. The people of Millfield knew that they had to act fast. They had to destroy the altar, to banish the entity once and for all. But as they approached, they felt a sudden, overwhelming wave of terror. They could feel the river's power, its call to madness and death. And then the figure descended, its form coalescing into something solid and real. It was the stranger, the con man who had promised to save them. But now, he was something else entirely. His eyes glowed with an unearthly light, and his body twisted and writhed in impossible ways. And as the people watched in horror, he began to speak, his voice low and insistent. They could feel the river's power flowing through him, its madness and terror making him stronger with every passing moment. And then he lunged at them, his hands reaching out to claim them for the river. The people of Millfield fought bravely, but they were no match for the power of the river. One by one, they fell, their bodies sinking down into the water with a soft, bubbling sound. And then the river claimed them, taking them down into its depths and holding them there, forever lost to the world above one by one until the whole town was gone swallowed up by the river.